What is up, everybody? Welcome into Shout, a Buffalo football podcast. It was Friday, April 25th, right before midnight. The Bills and the entire NFL are wrapped up for day 2 of the NFL draft, and it was quite an interesting watch, Ryan. I mean, obviously, from a Bills perspective, we're going to get into those picks, but Shedeur Sanders not going on day 2 of the draft is such a compelling storyline, like trying to figure out what's going on, because there is something funny here, because from everybody that evaluated this guy, I don't think anybody had him as the top quarterback in this draft. Maybe not everybody had him as a first round draft pick, but when you see this kid out of Oregon going here late in the third round, Gabriel, it's like, what is happening?
It's I think it has to do with his father, the personality, the bold statements pre-draft. I mean, it was only a few months ago where Deion Sanders was out there talking about, we're gonna have a say on where he goes, or we're gonna kind of pick the team that he wants to play for, and you can't do that, first of all, unless you are a generational type of prospect. You can't kind of dictate things like that or try to. And I think that rubbed people wrong. We've talked about some of the things that he did post game, that being Shedeur Sanders, where he went up to another player and talked trash about something on social media and how that won't fly. But now that you're starting to see some of these other quarterbacks go off the board that are not as talented as he is, Dylan Gabriel, no offense to him, but his size and limitations in this league, it's unfortunate, because you do feel for the kid. I know he hasn't had a very rough life being the son of a multimillionaire and things like that, but he chose football. He has a passion for football. He worked his way up to being in the discussion of being a first round pick a few months ago, and now we're sitting here and he's on the board still on day 3.
And I also think that, like, part of this conversation has to be, there are consequences for the decisions you make, like how you carry yourself, some of the off the field stuff. Like, if you just took in a vacuum Shedeur Sanders, the football player, I think he'd be off the board by now. But there are things away from the meetings, away from the Deion Sanders stuff, that I just didn't like during last year's college football season. You know, we were talking about this last night, the interaction with the quarterback after the game. It rubs people the wrong way. And when you have to deal with that kind of stuff, I think teams are more willing to sign up for something like that when it's a can't miss kind of prospect. But I think people are in agreement across the NFL that Shedeur Sanders is not that.
No, he's not. And there are limitations. This is a weak quarterback class. Overall, there are teams that might not view him as being worth the headache of bringing Deion in, the complaining on social media. They're not viewing him clearly as a starter at this point. So is that what you want as your number 2 quarterback on a team? And I can't remember who said it tonight. I believe it was on the NFL Network draft. They kind of compared it to the distraction of back in the day with Tim Tebow, and obviously a much better quarterback prospect himself, that being Shedeur Sanders. But the media circus, the cameras, everything that came along with Tebow, even when he was a backup or late in his career when you knew he wasn't a starter anymore at that point, there's still all that media circus around him. And is it worth it to bring him in if you already have a starter in place, if you don't know if he can be a long-term starter for you?
Okay, so we've made it, 4 or 5 minutes here. We haven't even started talking about the Bills
Right.
draft picks. We're going to get way into those picks here, because philosophically, Ryan, like, we're going to have to really deconstruct what the Bills are thinking here. And I think there's a lot of confused fans, and I think rightfully so. You know, you had, going into today, earlier this morning, Ohio State defensive tackle Tyleik Williams. He met with the Detroit Lions media group, and one of the things that he said during that session was, had the Lions not picked him, he was almost certain that the Bills would pick him at 30. This is a true one technique, right? 330 pounds, big size, potential pass rush upside. And so you hear something like that going into a day like today, and you think, okay, Alfred Collins, Jamari Caldwell goes in the 3rd round, some of these bigger bodied interior defensive linemen, you think that might be the target. And the Bills decide, sitting there at 56, they're going to get aggressive, and I think smartly, when it comes to Brandon Beane. And I'll talk about this. I'm very conflicted on the decision about TJ Sanders. And we're going to talk this through and maybe land at a grade here by the time we're done talking about it. But he smartly decides at 56, hey, the run in the second round on defensive linemen, it's going to start, right? Like players start coming off the board. Sanders is the first defensive lineman picked. And so what I think he thought was, I'm going to get up there, get the guy we have graded highest. And the reason they chose Sanders, despite not being this true one technique, is because of the interior pass rush chops that he offers. And I think what they're thinking is, okay, we can go out and get a true first and second down, run stuffing, nose tackle, a bigger body guy, but that's not going to help us on third down against Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson. On those downs, you want Ed Oliver on the field. You want Joey Bosa and Greg Rousseau, and now TJ Sanders, who, right, some of these stats that I just sent out to our insiders, they're eye-popping, right? 2.40 second average time to first pressure last season was the best among all defensive linemen in college football. His 7.2% pressure rate from his defensive tackle spot also ranked in the top 30. So we're talking about, from a pass rushing perspective on the inside, elite of the elite in this class. And I think that's what the Bills, more than anything, value-wise at this spot, they were signing up for.
Yeah, and you look at the weight, he was listed at 297. Definitely undersized if you wanted to play him just as a one tech. But when he met with the media, he said he's up to 305 and to 310 range. And he feels he could still be as explosive if he gets up to 315. If you get him up to 315, that's pretty much what Daquan Jones weighs. I believe he's 317, 318. So that is more of what the Bills have done in their history with the one tech position, not having that huge big body player. This draft process, the pre-draft interviews, the private workouts, everything, the formal interviews at the combine, you can go that far back. They've looked at a lot of those 330-pound linemen, and you start to think maybe there is a shift in thinking with what they're going to do. You hear Tyleik Williams today say the Bills, loved his game, and he thought that he would go at 30 if Detroit had not picked him at 28. We'll never know if that's the case, because maybe the Bills did have a very high grade on Tyleik Williams, but maybe they had a higher grade on Max Hairston. We'll never know how that plays out. But then they trade up and they go with TJ Sanders, who is not that big prospect, but he has the explosiveness that you mentioned. I think he can be solid against the run as well. Versatility is part of his game. Versatility is something the Bills love. So I think from that standpoint, it makes a lot of sense. But there were still some intriguing options in terms of those true one techs available at that point in time.
If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel as well. Brandon Beane said that when it comes to one technique, philosophically, you can go out and add those players in free agency, which, there's probably still some guys out there. Quentin Jefferson and Jordan Phillips were added last year. Those guys didn't really fall into that category for me. The Bills have never really truly added a one technique, unless you kind of think about maybe a Zion Logue in that department as somebody that they think year one going into year two, maybe there's some chops there as somebody on the periphery of their defensive line room. I asked him at the end of his press conference if one technique was off the table, and he said, if they're a good football player, no. So it's like you got to check certain boxes before the Bills are willing to sign up. You can't just be big and good against the run. You got to be able to kind of fill other needs as well. So I think it's an interesting addition. I think both moves that were made today, and we're going to talk about Landon Jackson here in a second, were made with the idea of being able to affect the quarterback. And in the playoffs against, like we mentioned, Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes and all these kinds of guys, you got to be able to do that. Now, this is another thing Brandon Beane was talking about with TJ Sanders, basketball background. He started playing football late in high school, and you could see that in his pass rush arsenal. So, like, in terms of, like, maybe he's not the biggest interior defensive lineman, but because of the quick footwork, his hand usage, the way that his body moves, he's able to kind of cause disruption in a really big way. And that is actually, interestingly enough, something the Bills have never had. They never had, like, a player that kind of fits the same mold as Ed Oliver, where they would be on the field at the same time on the inside. So from that perspective, I think this is an interesting philosophical approach to solving the problem that's eliminated you from the playoffs the last couple of years.
Yeah, and I see in the comments here, John, we still have 7 picks left. Absolutely, they could go out and get a Caldwell, who is more of a true one tech. They could address it there. There's
Caldwell's gone. He went away.
Caldwell. Sorry, not Caldwell. I know. I'm blanking on who I was thinking of. You're right.
West.
Yes, thank you, West. You've mentioned, and I haven't followed free agency in the last few weeks. You mentioned Benito Jones a long time ago, so that goes back to what you're talking about with the free agency and the players that are out there sitting there. So if the Bills want to address one tech, they have the picks to do it, but there's also guys sitting in free agency that you can sign to a vet minimum deal at this point or very close to it. So there is something to what Bean is saying. You want to let this all play out. It's just, I think after, the Harrison pick, who was a little bit of a not what the Bills traditionally have looked like in cornerback, I think maybe you and I are probably both sitting there saying, okay, maybe they are having some philosophical tinkerings with this defense in terms of what they're looking for and what they're going to do. And now this is more of what they've done, an undersized guy, but the ability to play 3 tech and 1 tech is very appealing, probably to Bean, probably to Marcus West, and the rest of this coaching staff as well, obviously.
So Spin over on YouTube with this comment, and I think this is an important point, and I want to talk about Dwayne Carter and what this means for him. They won't ever be on the field at the same time because the offense is just going to run it up the gut at 1 tech Dwayne Carter, and it will be 3rd and 2, and they'll be living in those kind of situations. And listen, I think that that's a concern, right? Like, I think that's a concern of being able to stop the run consistently. I also think it wasn't talked enough about after the pick was made at how good TJ Sanders is against the run.
Yeah.
He's going to be on the field on 1st and 2nd down. You got to hope that Daquan Jones still has some chops. I don't think Dwayne Carter really probably factors much into things. He's probably going to, he's going to have to for the first 6 weeks, but I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on him coming into this season, and he's going to have to get bigger. He's going to have to get bulkier. He's going to have to be a factor on 1st and 2nd down to stay on the field once Larry Ogunjobi gets back. But again, this is a 3rd round draft pick in Dwayne Carter, who was drafted to be a 3 technique, who, that's how Brandon said last year they saw him, and they're very quickly pivoting off of that. And because of the circumstances of the next year's draft, now they're going in a different direction because that's just the situation they're in. And I don't think that's the best case scenario for a young developing player when you're asking them to do all these different things all the time.
Yeah, no, it's understandable. And there is pressure on Carter. I think there was pressure on Carter before this draft as well. You look at Ogunjobi. I thought he was brought in originally to kind of push him for that backup job behind Ed Oliver. Then we find out about the suspension. So now you're sitting there saying, okay, Carter's going to have a chance to prove himself this summer, early in the year. And now you added TJ Sanders, who can play 3 tech and 1 tech. It could bump him down just in the overall pecking order of this defensive tackle group. And it sounds weird saying that just 1 year removed from him being a day 2 pick.
Yeah, and I'm going to bring up the free agent class right now because I want to see what's out there. Jordan Phillips kind of still sits out there, but at this point in his career, what he did really well in that playoff game last year was, I thought, rush the passer, right? I don't think you're bringing him in here to be a space eating 1 technique that you're going to ask to line up over the center. Let me see here. You said Benito Jones played for
Miami.
You
had mentioned him a few weeks ago, and I have not seen his name in the news, and maybe I missed that one.
See,
so I don't know.
So we got, who are some available free agents?
While you're looking that up, shout out to Adam, a new member here in YouTube. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, become a member. We see your comments. When you do that, they're highlighted a little bit differently. So thanks for the support.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it right now. I don't know where 2025 free agents. It's late, Ryan. Okay, I'm losing it here. But there's usually it says available free agents, all types. So I don't know if this is all the players that have already signed. It must be. We could do that in a later show. I'm not super worried about it. It's confusing though,
Right.
like because everything that it seems like the Bills have been setting up over the course of this offseason, from everything that Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane have said throughout the process, was be like, getting more size and maybe putting some size next to Ed Oliver and seeing what that looks like. And I don't think it's a good practice to go into a draft and say we're only looking for this flavor of player. Like, you have to follow your board, you have to look for traits. There's different ways to do things. Like there might be multiple paths to the kind of success that you want to see. I just don't know. In those situations on third and short, are you going to put Sanders and Oliver on the field at the same time? And if you're not, was this not the way to go in this draft? That's a question that is only going to be answered once they start playing games.
Right. And time will tell how that all pans out. And, I think we also have to remember that we can't always take what Brandon Beane, Sean McDermott, uh, what they say pre-draft as being something that's definitely going to happen. Last year before the draft, all we heard about at the wide receiver position was speed, speed, speed. They go out and they draft Keon Coleman, who is the exact opposite of speed. Now they're looking at speed in this year's class. They'll probably add one on day 3 at the wide receiver position. They talked about maybe getting a little bit bigger on the interior. They go with more of a traditional one tech, what they have in Daquan Jones. So, I think they go in with best intentions in terms of we might go out, we might add a true one tech, but like you said, TJ Sanders probably had a much higher grade than any other defensive tackle that they had on their board.
If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel as well. We really appreciate it. Hanging out with us really late night here after day 2 of the NFL draft. All right, I want to move on. I want to talk about Landon Jackson, because to me, this was the real, to me, big swing, big connection. Like, this feels like a potential double, right? That Brandon Beane has gotten so good at hitting over the course of his career. This is a guy that a lot of people in the draft community thought could be an early day 2 pick. The Bills make this big trade up 15 spots to go get TJ Sanders. They have to give up both second round picks. So they move back at 62 all the way back 72, 10 spots, and they end up still landing Landon Jackson, 6'6", 264-pound edge rusher out of Arkansas. This guy is absolutely wowed at the Senior Bowl. Had himself a really nice day at the NFL Combine. Brandon Beane said he tested better than he ever thought that he was going to, because he's probably one of these guys that they really liked throughout the process, that was hoping maybe didn't test very well, but he still ends up landing for them. And he's in a great situation, because when he walks in the door, he's defensive end 4, maybe competing for defensive end 4 with Javon Solomon. The expectations can be low for him, but if he comes in and hits the ground running, can use that, pro ready body, that physicality, that violence, the way that he uses his hands, I think that he could be a factor for this team and really help them add another kind of interesting, diverse piece to their edge rushing room.
Yeah, and I love this pick. We've talked about this player a lot. I mentioned, the Shout Insiders. I said we've talked about this player a ton. How the Bills were very interested in him, and he said so. Said as much during his Zoom conference with the media. They were at my pro day. They worked him out. They took him to dinner. Formal interview at the combine. Talked to him constantly, and then you get to round 3, and you can get this large defensive end in terms of size, 6'7", 266 pounds, I believe, off the top of my head. So it has that NFL ready frame already. Very explosive player. I love his game. Daniel Jeremiah on the broadcast compared him to Ziggy Ansah. And if you remember Ziggy early in his career, I think he had like 8 sacks one year. He had 14 in his 3rd or 4th season. He was a menace when healthy, and then injuries kind of took a toll on Ziggy. And if he's anywhere near that caliber of player or impact player, Buffalo is going to have a steal here. And like you said, you don't need to have him out there on meaningful reps right away. You have Joey Bosa, obviously, on those meaningful snaps. probably on a pitch count. You want to have him on a pitch count, but on third and those long, let him pin his ears back and go after the quarterback. Greg Rousseau on the other side, who's earned that job. Monster extension, great against the run, very good against the pass, getting after the quarterback. So you have those two. But then, Hoyt's out for 6 weeks, so there's that opportunity now. He's going to compete against AJ Epinesa. He's going to compete against Javon Solomon. So, it wouldn't shock me if he ends up being edge number 3 or edge number 4 by the end of this season. And then just knowing that with Bosa being on a 1-year deal, he could be that player opposite Greg Rousseau as early as 2026.
The thing for me that Landon Jackson said in his press conference today on Zoom that really stood out, he idolizes Max Crosby and really has patterned his game and his attack after Max Crosby. And so I took a little time tonight and I looked at these two players side by side. And it is really uncanny how much their measurables match up.
Yeah.
Crosby, 6'5", 255, right? Landon Jackson, 6'6", 264. 33 and a quarter inch arm length for Landon Jackson, 10-inch hands. 32 7/8 for Max Crosby, 9 3/4. Their athleticism score on NFL.com almost exactly alike. 40 time, vertical jump, broad jump, 3-cone, almost all of it. Landon Jackson has a little bit of an edge on Max Crosby. And listen, you got to be careful when you're comparing players to guys at their position in the league that have been elite of the elite. But if he can even be a poor man's version of what Max Crosby does, and I think about it, all these guys in the Bills room, like you think about AJ Epinesa and Greg Rousseau, super tight with Von Miller, the Von Miller pass rush summit. Max Crosby is a huge piece of that. You think if Landon Jackson can get to that this summer, maybe we'll get a chance to ask him about that tomorrow when he comes to Buffalo. Now you can start to pick his brain and figure out a way to take a couple of those Max Crosby tools and put them in your own box and figure out a way to unleash them. We talked about Max Crosby so much at the beginning of the offseason as a potential trade candidate. If you can get a Max Crosby like in training here in Landon Jackson in the 3rd round, I think you're really excited about the potential. And I think these are both kind of like decent floor, potentially high ceiling kind of players on the defensive line. And you hope that they hit and they can be impact players in year 1. But these are long-term picks to be a part of this defensive line group for the next couple of years.
This is a dart with extreme upside at the edge rusher position. We talked last night. Brandon Beane talked about how he would love to have an elite pass rusher, but they're usually not available. And if they are, they cost millions upon millions of dollars. There's a reason why, the Bengals haven't moved on from Trey Hendrickson, although Hendrickson wants out and they just added an edge rusher. It's the fact that another team's going to have to give him a salary well over $30 million, maybe close to $40 million. And that's not easy for most teams to be able to do. So the Bills are hoping that Jackson can develop into a top tier pass rusher, pay him in due time. It's a player that I really liked in this draft class, very high on him. Also shout out to him for says he styles his game a little bit after Jason Taylor, which that's a throwback for a player his age. Taylor, I remember watching with the Dolphins all those years, and he was great along with Zach Thomas on those teams whenever they played against the Bills. Those are two guys that you had to watch out for.
Yeah, for sure. And there's a couple other really fun things that Brandon Beane said about Jackson in how much time they spent evaluating him. He said all 3 of the new or the defensive line touching coaches, if you will, Ryan Nielsen, who's now a defensive assistant, he's going to spend a lot of time in the D-line room, Marcus West, and I never say his name right. It's Jason Rabovich. Am I saying that right?
I believe so.
Close enough. He's the new assistant defensive line coach. He was with the Bills before. I mean, they've added some firepower in that room, and the 3 of them combined have done a lot of work. Brandon Beane said that they've been on the road, going and visiting prospects to personally work them out, going to pro days, doing Zoom conferences. TJ Sanders came in on a 30 visit. Did Landon come in on a 30 visit? If not, they definitely did a Zoom and met with him multiple times.
Right. No 30 visit. They, I talked to someone close to him throughout the process. They just kind of viewed him as such a clean prospect, no injury concerns, no character concerns. There was no reason to bring him in on a 30 visit when they had already had a private workout with him. We're at his pro day, took him out to dinners, multiple calls. They felt very comfortable with him as a player. And a lot of these 30 visits, when you bring them in, it's someone you're not as familiar with. And then it might be injury concerns, like some of the corners that they brought in, or some of the character concerns with some of the players that they brought in.
The other thing that being said, and there was a lot of excitement amongst those defensive coaches when these two picks were made, specifically Jackson at the end, getting him at 72. When they watched him on tape, and even the games that they were able to scout him and watch him live, the big thing that stood out was not only that he won, but like what he had in his bag when he was like in a bind, right? Like sometimes like pass rushers get themselves into trouble, and it's like, how do you work yourself out of it? And do you rush yourself out of the play? Like that's a big part against Patrick Mahomes. That's so important. That's what stuck out to me when Bean was talking about it and made me even like this pick even more. If you have a really high IQ rusher on the edge that knows against Patrick Mahomes, if you break contain, even while trying to, run him down, you're going to make things that much worse when he gets out to the side and makes plays at the second level. So I think that to me, if you're starting with that baseline and you can get him in your building and you can kind of start the building blocks and teaching him from the ground up, but you know that he's coming in with all of these just natural instincts at the position, that's what you really get excited about. And listen, this is a huge investment on the defensive side of the ball on day one and day two of this draft. To go out and get your CB2 of the future, a potential starter. Landon Jackson, he could be a starter next season in 2026. Right. I mean, right? Joey Bosa's on the last year of his deal. AJ Epenesa's on the last year of his deal. I mean, you're drafting these players to potentially be starters. I don't know if TJ Sanders projects to be Daquan Jones's replacement. That's what it felt like when they drafted him. If he can get back maybe up to that size. What's that?
But he could, absolutely.
But
he's not far off
exactly.
weight-wise.
So you got a bunch of pieces that are obviously in the mix to play in 2025, but they're also pieces that you hope earn long-term impactful positions on this defense.
Yeah, 100%. And it's been fun to kind of monitor this draft class because 2 or 30 visitors, one they've done a ton of due diligence on, all SEC players, all players with great relative athletic scores. They were all at the Senior Bowl. There's these little things that you want to, track, and how much due diligence did the Bills do? The Bills have been known to go after players that they've looked at the Senior Bowl as well. So that's just another little, nugget caveat that you want to look at. It would be great if we could actually talk to the former executive of the Reese's Senior Bowl. I know he's with Oklahoma now as their GM, but it would be great to see, like, what did he see from those players there? How do they project as pros? But, the Bills have had many opportunities to look at these players. And in the SEC, they play against the best of the best, too. So they're going to be more pro ready, in my opinion, than some players that play at smaller schools and have lesser competition. That's not always the case, obviously, but they talked about that. You're going against dogs every week. I think maybe Landon Jackson set a press conference record for the amount of times he used the word dog, talking about both of his actual dog and just his mentality as a player. But love that about him.
So in Dane Brugler's draft guide, when he wrote about Landon Jackson, who was his number 9 edge rusher, the tape that he really pushed people to go watch was the game against LSU for Arkansas and how Jackson played against number 4 overall pick Will Campbell. And actually, there was a tweet that I saw on social media after the Jackson pick was made where somebody said, man, the Bills might have just got themselves a real under the radar force. If Will Campbell's the number 4 overall player in this draft, how did Landon Jackson last until 72? Because go watch what he did against him in that game. And it's one game. You don't want to overreact. But he's played, to your point, in the SEC against really good tackle competition. And I feel like he's battle-tested coming into the league. Like, I think you get really excited about this. Like, Greg Rousseau, when he came into the league, was coming off of a year where he didn't play football during COVID, right? Like, so there was a little bit of time that he needed to kind of get himself to a place where he felt comfortable. Then, AJ Epinesa, he was going through a complete body change. Like, they were changing him from this big brawny, bruiser type edge rusher into more of a slender, more trying to unlock some untapped potential athleticism. This is a completely different situation. I feel like Landon Jackson, Sanders to a lesser degree, they're kind of pro ready. And I think both of them have ceilings, but also room to try to go and reach those ceilings.
100%. I have the full quote from Daniel Jeremiah. Wrote a
Oh,
story
yeah,
on.
great.
This was someone who just elevated through the entire process. I thought he was a top 50 player in this class. Ziggy Ansah, if you go back to Detroit and remember when he came into the league, that's who he reminded me of. Very disruptive. He has a lot of wins against some of the better tackles in this draft class. I got a call from somebody after they watched him. They said, if Will Campbell is going top 5, what's wrong with this Landon Jackson? Because he got the best of Campbell. The Senior Bowl game, he was dominant. Then he goes to the Combine, and he had an outstanding showing there. Once the season ended, this dude aced the process.
Watching there's a clip online. I retweeted it. You can find it on my X account of a bunch of cut-ups of him rushing the passer. To me, and I'm going back to Sanders now, so I'm bouncing around a little bit. To me, what's really fun to kind of project him into what it's going to look like on the Bills defensive line. He looks like a bowling ball, like in there. Like he bounces between tackles and guards like they're pins on a lane at a bowling alley. Like it's really impressive how he's able to kind of like almost like what are those? Oh, pinball around. That's what I meant, not a
Yeah.
bowling ball. Pinball around, kind of like in the muck of it, and still find a way to find open grass. And then the pursuit after finding that grass. Sometimes these players they go through like a metamorphosis when they're in college, right? One of the issues on a lot of these draft profiles of Sanders, and maybe why some evaluators had him so far down their list for a guy that had the pass rush advanced analytics that he's had, is because people weren't convinced he loved football at the beginning, right? Like,
Right.
Giving up on plays at times, like maybe showing up late to meetings and that kind of thing, making its way around NFL circles or the scouting community. That seems to be not an issue for the Bills doing the due diligence on him. And he said, listen, I love tackles for a loss more than I love sacking the quarterback. I love getting in the backfield. And it shows when you watch him rush on his clips.
100%. A lot to like about his game. Some comments here, Matt, about what's left for the Bills to address. I don't think there's any glaring issues for the Bills left to address in terms of like a dire need. They've looked at a ton of fast wide receivers, though, in the pre-draft process. You look at the top 3 available remaining wide receivers on the draft board right now. I think if they can stumble into one of them somehow, some way, they'd be thrilled. Jalen Royals, top 30 visitor. Torrey Horton, they brought in for a pre-draft visit as well. Both of those guys have blazing speed. And then Jalen Lane. Lane, if I remember correctly, projects more of a slot receiver. If I'm thinking, there's a few Jalen's in this draft, I believe. But he's another fast receiver. So I think a fast receiver is going to be on the menu on day 3. I think a linebacker is certainly a choice that's going to take place. Paul or Chris Paul Jr. is the top remaining linebacker on the board. They've done a lot of homework on him. Maybe Sean Dolak here is his name called. So those are 2 positions specifically I'm looking at. Billy Bowman would be a great addition at safety. I think another safety could happen as well here on day 3.
All right, so let's go to next day of the draft, day 3. Let's look ahead. There's some really intriguing prospects remaining, and we've seen a couple comments in here about wide receivers. So I'm going to list the top 10. Or did you just do that?
I just listed 3 of them.
Who did you say? So I don't repeat.
I said Jalen Royals, Jalen Lane, and I mentioned Torrey Horton.
Okay. So Dante Thornton, if you're looking for speed out of Tennessee, he still sits on the board as Lance Zierlein's 8th wide receiver prospect available. Elick Imanor, did I say it right? Out of Stanford?
I believe you did. I don't know if they did much homework on him, but could still obviously be a day 3 pick for the Bills.
I remember somebody that Chris Trapasso loves, and he talked about him quite a bit when I met up with him at the Combine. Elijah Badger out of Florida. So he is a senior out of Florida. I don't know if the Bills maybe have some PTSD about Florida after the Kyer Elam selection, but this is a 6'1", 200-pounder. Athletic score was decent, 4.43 speed. projected to be a 6th-round pick. Very athletic, and a game comes natural to him. Mid-route acceleration and speed change, catch coverage, off guard, stops abruptly, opening windows on hitches and comebacks. Soft but sudden hands with easy extension outside the frame. Slippery when the ball is in his hands. It doesn't say a lot about work down the field, which I think, like, the Bills are going to take a flyer on a wide receiver at this point. I'd probably want that to be in the draft profile, somebody that can win on the outside.
Right.
We've talked plenty about Jalen Royals. Both of us are fans. It'll be interesting to see if the Bills, I mean, they still have 7 picks left in this draft, Ryan. It's kind of crazy to think about that.
Very crazy to think about. You have to wonder if they're going to either package some picks to move up in tomorrow's draft, if they're going to trade some picks for future selections. I wouldn't put that past Brandon Beane. In some drafts, I believe it was last year's draft, they traded a 5th for a 4th. It was the 4th that I think they traded back to the Bears tonight in that deal. So, future picks are very valuable to him, especially when you know that you don't necessarily have a ton of opening jobs on your roster.
What's one other position? You mentioned Dolak.
Yep.
What's one position that you think people aren't really thinking about right now that could potentially be addressed tomorrow?
It's a great question, because those are two that I think will be addressed. I think safety is not a pressing matter, could be addressed. I think tight end could be addressed in terms of some competition for tight end 3 on this team. But that would be a late pick. They don't really have any glaring needs left. I'd love to see them double dip at defensive tackle as well. What about you?
I think tight end is going to be really important. I mean, Quentin Morris, losing him, I don't think he's signed anywhere yet.
He's
So maybe
still out there.
yeah, so maybe he could be brought back if they don't like some of the guys that are at the bottom end of the draft, tight end or an undrafted free agent. I mean, Morris was that, right? Running back's going to be interesting with 7 picks. Do they figure out a way to add one of those? What does that mean for James Cook at this range of the draft? I don't necessarily know that puts any pressure, but it'll be interesting to see. I do want to note quickly on Maxwell Hairston. So Brandon Beane was asked about the accusations that were made a couple of years ago by a young woman. I think it was his first year at Kentucky, alleging a Title IX situation that was very much investigated by Kentucky. And Brandon Beane said was investigated heavily by the NFLs. He went so far to call Maxwell Hairston an impeccable young man, somebody that the Bills did their research on and the NFL did their research on of that whole situation, because he would never been invited to the combine or to the NFL draft, where obviously he went viral. So the Bills, did their due diligence on him. You always kind of raise your eyebrows when you see anybody involved in it. And listen, the Bills have a history here of having to deal with situations like that. So we all remember the Matt Ariza situation and how that all played out. I think that they have a lot of experience figuring out how that goes. In the same draft class with Mike Green, who was a top 15 draft pick out of Marshall, 2 domestic violence incidences that basically pushed him all the way down to 56, and of course lands right into the hands of the Baltimore Ravens, who I just saw a report. They came out and said that they did tons of work on Mike Green to vet this whole situation, and they're thrilled to get him. So I did want to pass that along, because I saw some of the social media posts kind of getting floated around from what this woman posted about Max Hairston a couple of years ago. He said that I guess he told the Bills that he'd be willing to take a lie detector test to prove that he didn't do anything wrong. So something that I'm sure he'll be asked about at minicamp, but this is something that's been brought up, and I know a lot of fans were like, "Hey, what's going on here?" Brandon Beane was asked about it. The Bills were satisfied with the research that they did and where they kind of landed on Hairston in this whole incident or alleged incident.
Yeah, and that's good to know. Obviously, that they've done their homework. They feel.
Is it me or Ryan? Can you still hear me, everybody? Are we just frozen on Ryan Talbot?
Now I'm here. Mine were definitely doing the little spins. I don't know if yours were, but yeah, I'm showing. I don't know. It's late. But I like the Ravens draft class so far. The Patriots are doing a really good job adding weapons for Drake May. And then the Bears with the tight end, and then they go back and get a really good wide receiver. They're going to be a fun team to watch too.
Ryan, you got a new profile picture. Your frozen face that just happened as your internet went down. I would like that to be your new avatar on X
Wonderful.
starting tomorrow. All right. Anyway, that'll do it for tonight. 40 minutes after day 2. We don't know about post round 3. We'll have a show definitely. We just don't know if it will be tomorrow night or if it will be like Sunday morning, early afternoon. Stay tuned for that. I'll obviously make the live edition, and if you're subscribed on YouTube, hit that like button and subscribe. You will get a notification when we are going live, and we will break down the entire draft. And if we do it on Sunday, it's almost even better because we can get into the UDFAs as well. So we'll probably hold off on everything the Bills do. If you want instant reaction, head over to our insider text line, 716-528-6727. We'll be passing along thoughts all weekend and well into next week. I mean, haven't been as active. You were absolutely firing off insider text all day today. So people got their money's worth. I haven't been as, because I want to kind of let this settle, want to do my due diligence. We have all off season here to really dive into this draft class. We'll get to rookie minicamp. So over the next week, this is a great time to become an insider because we're going to be steadily over the course of the next week, filling the insider text line with our thoughts on these draft picks.
Yeah, absolutely. Become a Shout Insider. I'll be definitely sending a ton of messages tomorrow. As soon as the draft is over, I'll have my UDFA trackers. So I'll get as much news up there as I can about that. That's always a fun time as well.
All right. For Ryan Talbot, I'm Matt Parrino. We'll see you very, very soon. Enjoy the rest of the draft. Man, we're almost through it, man. It's going fast. We're going to be to rookie minicamp before you know it.